Hey, Margie here. I always love to share new information and treatments that can truly enhance your life. And today we're going to focus on plant medicine and psychedelics. And I know that sounds sort of woo woo, but the truth is, this has been used for centuries by indigenous populations. And there's so many conditions that it can be useful for and help. And I'm really excited about our special guest, Dr. Maya Shetreat. And Dr. Maya is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure and the Master Plant Experience, The Science, Safety, and Sacred Ceremony of Psychedelics. She has been featured in the New York Times, the Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, the Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches earth based programs for transformational healing, including professional training programs for psychedelic assisted approaches. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers from around the world and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. And I've known Dr. Maya for many years. I love her work, and I'm really excited because she really explains what this is and how it can be used to, as she calls it, live an enchanted life. So stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Maya. I'm so happy to have you here. This is such an interesting topic, and I always like to share new things that people can put into their life, make a difference, and something maybe everybody hasn't heard of or they're not aware of. So I'm so excited that you're going to talk about plant medicine today, and welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Before we get started, I always love to know the backstory. Here, you're a child neurologist and, an MD trained. And how in the world, I mean, I love the work you do, but how in the world did you get there from your initial traditional training?
Well, for one thing, I think I went into medicine with the idea that I wanted to do psychoneuroimmunology. This was because I saw a Bill Moyer special. I think I must have been in college. And in this special, they were looking at like mind body healing approaches. And one of the things that they were doing, or that they interviewed these doctors who had given a little girl who had lupus they were giving her meds, and she was having kidney failure from her meds. But then if they stopped the meds, then she would have a terrible flare of lupus. So it was this like lose lose situation. And they decided to give her castor oil with every dose of her meds. And then they stopped giving her meds, but continued to give her castor oil on the schedule of her meds. And she responded as if she was on meds, but with no kidney issues. So it was like very cool. And I was like, yeah. And they said, this is called psychoneuroimmunology. It's a new field of medicine. And I thought, great. And I wrote my medical school essay about it, and they let me into medical school. And then I was in medical school, and kind of as you say, it is very conventional. And I kind of forgot all of that until actually. So I had children during my medical training, medical school residency, fellowship. I had a child each each segment. And I had my three kids, but my youngest got sick. And initially, that took me into kind of remembering when the conventional approaches were not helpful to him. He had asthma and this, and he was very ill, actually. Um, I went into diet, I went into gut brain, all these things that at the time nobody was actually talking about. I mean, only the most fringe people talked about, the gut brain connection, even though it was really all over the science. Um, but then, so I started doing that, and I wrote my book, The Dirt Cure. But then that same kid who did very well with that approach, some years later, we had this big mold issue, and I had to move out of my apartment. We were out for 5 months. They gutted the place. They cleaned it afterwards with literally toothbrushes on like door frames. I mean, got rid of all the upholstered furniture, all of that. And we come back into the apartment 5 months later, and 2 weeks into that, he had a seizure. His first ever seizure in the bathroom that was the epicenter of the mold. But it had been gutted to the studs. There was nothing left. They had tested, nothing was there anymore. And he'd been on all the diet and the supplements and the nature and the everything. And I'm just holding him in my arms. And here I'm like a pediatric neurologist, right? Adult and pediatric neurologist, holding my child who just had a seizure in my arms. And I'm thinking, I know so much. I do so much for so many people. People were coming to me from all over the world because there was nobody doing what I was doing. And I knew as I was holding him, I don't know what to do for him because this is something like energetic or spiritual. It's not something physical. And I just knew that with all my being, as a mother knows. And I thought, I don't even know who to ask. I'm going to have to figure this out. And I, through a kind of circuitous journey, as it always is, found people, they turn you away. It's difficult. You have to come back and ask again, all the drama necessary. But I ended up finding myself on this journey to Ecuador to study with a fourth generation shaman who was going to take us to different indigenous communities throughout the country to learn about healing. It was not supposed to be about plant medicine or psychedelic. I was not like going to like a plant medicine retreat. I had no intention of anything like that. I thought we'll learn about those probably, but we're going to learn more about like some of the other really fascinating things that they do that doesn't involve altered consciousness or anything like that. And then to my surprise, there was a little bit of, we learned about those plants, but then boom, they kind of surprised us with a couple of different ceremonies with different plants. Um, it was actually truly a surprise to me. Um, so, so it was not, I kind of say I was pulled into, the sacred plant medicine or psychedelics world kicking and screaming. Like I'm not your typical, gung ho kind of person because that's not what I ever expected. And of course, and maybe you would agree with this, like these kinds of experiences where I thought I was going to heal my son or my patients, right? It was really all started with my own healing. And that was the beginning of a whole new life for me. I was already integrative. And it's really why I even went into medicine to begin with. But then this became more about ceremony and um, connecting with nature and um, ancestors and all different kinds of things that are very much indigenous and probably for most of us and most of the people listening, not that many generations ago that was a very important part of life, rites of passage, rituals, ceremonies, ancestors, etc. But a lot of it has gotten erased in, recent times.
Oh, I love that story, and I love that you combine both. You have that background, so to draw from, but then to add all these practices is really that special. Wait, just before you go on, what happened to your son?
So he had just that one event at 7 years old. He's now um, 18 and he is in college. He's, in fact, in a culinary program. Um, and he is 6'2", strapping, athletic person, did, wonderfully well, knock wood. But, I think those things sometimes are just these eye openers and instigators, sometimes for us, right? So yes, thank you for asking. He's doing very well.
Oh, that's so great. I love this story. It's so amazing sometimes where the universe takes us and where our journeys how our journeys happen, never as we plan them, but yet the lessons learned and how we can take that into the rest of our life is just so very special. Okay, so let's talk about how people listening can use master plants. So why don't you share from maybe the basic, just sort of so we get a grasp on how powerful they are and what type of conditions, because so many of the conditions are root causes of osteoporosis, and so many people suffer from these things. And not always are they finding the answers, other than maybe lots of medications. So why don't you
Yeah.
share a little bit about the whole plant medicine topic and who can, the master plants, who can really benefit from this?
Yeah. So, so I wrote this book called The Master Plant Experience, and it is about psychedelics, but it's also about master plants. And part of the concept of master plants is that these are right for us. We think of plants as things that we use, right? Maybe to be healthy, or maybe whatever we may herbs, medicinal herbs, maybe. Um, but but in indigenous culture, powerful plants that alter our consciousness in some way, and I'll explain what I mean by that, are called master plants because they are considered master teachers. And in that way, they're actually considered in indigenous culture to be beings, not things, not drugs, not herbs, not tools, right? But actually transmitting ancient knowledge. So that's a big difference between how the global north, let's say, sees plants in general and how many indigenous communities. And of course, I'm not a spokesperson for indigenous communities, but having learned with many different groups from many different parts of the world now, this is sort of like something that is common to many different indigenous groups. And, I'll say this, especially because, you may have a science thinking kind of group, right? And a science informed group, that about 60 to 80%, and it's a wide range, but I think it's closer to 80% of pharmaceuticals that we use come from indigenous knowledge, where various different anthropologists or pharmaceutical representatives went and studied with indigenous people and learned about different kinds of plants. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of plants in the jungle. And for anyone who hasn't been to the jungle, the plants are pretty, I mean, they're beautiful and interesting, but there's so many and it's very, very thick. You wouldn't just be able to find one or the other. And the way that the people who very accurately know how to use tens of thousands of different plants say that they know how is because they say the plants told us. And anthropologists and everybody kind of poo poo that. And they're like, okay, whatever. They're crazy. But, it was all probably trial and error, which would be impossible. But they come back and then they make pharmaceuticals and, a lot of the things that we use for cancer, for heart disease, for a lot of very common problems, even for anesthesia, all come from that. So, getting back to what are master plants, some examples of them are things like coffee or cacao or tobacco, right? Um, and and anyone who drinks coffee. I am currently a coffee drinker. I never was for most of my life, but somehow during the pandemic, I started getting into a little coffee ritual, and now I really love it. But the way people will go out of their way for coffee, or how they feel like they can't go on with their day without coffee, it doesn't make coffee bad. It just means coffee has like, we're in relationship with that plant. It's a powerful plant. It alters us in a certain way, which doesn't mean it makes us high or anything like that. It just means it shifts how we think and how we feel. Same thing with cacao. Like anyone who loves, let's say, their dark chocolate or chocolate in general, they're going to go out of their way particular times to make sure they have their chocolate supply, things like that. So, um, not all master plants are psychedelic, but any psychedelic plant is considered a master. So, some examples of master plants that are psychedelic that people might be hearing about a lot, probably the most well known is the psilocybe mushrooms, which are, the magic mushrooms. And I want to say the word plants is not considered a botanical, like technical term. It's flora, fauna, fungi, right, that do this. So magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, San Pedro cactus, peyote, iboga, salvia, and others that have been used, and I can kind of say more if you want, really for millennia. And we know for millennia they've been used um, by people to have rites of passage, to heal from illness. It's very common that there would be someone in any community that would know how to work with these plants only, these plants in particular, and they would be probably a last resort, right? After going through other regular kinds of medical approaches that might be common to that community, they would then, if needed, come for this physical, mental, emotional, spiritual healing. Now, who benefits from this? Well, I can tell you that from the standpoint of science, because probably people have seen on the cover of the New York Times or in magazines or other places that there's a ton of research now on psychedelics. So, in major institutions, academic institutions all around the world, there's psychedelic research going on, and in many cases, psychedelic centers where they're dedicating entire groups of labs just to learn about this. And what they're seeing is major depression, OCD, PTSD, eating disorders, sexual trauma, um, head injury, and addiction of all different kinds, among others, right? We're seeing dementia and many other kinds of conditions. Chronic pain is another, responding to, in some cases, just one dose of, let's say, a mushroom journey, right? So one dose of mushrooms, and I always am explicit to say with professional support before, during, and after. This is not like, I'm not saying it couldn't be helpful if like something someone did on their own or whatever, but in every study, support in preparation, during, integration afterwards is key, a key element. And people are finding after just one dose, macro dose, that lifelong or many years long conditions that we in conventional medicine are really terrible at treating and certainly at reversing, um, these people are finding transformation and literally their quality of life shoots up.
Dr. Maya, can you, because I know you do this with people. So would you just like walk us through like an example or maybe a case study or something so people can really conceptualize what this entails?
Yeah, well, so maybe before we do that, I can say a little bit about different kinds of dosing
Yeah, that would be great because
because
you mentioned macro dosing versus micro dosing and quantum dosing. So yeah, that would be really helpful.
yeah, and I only want to do that because I think a lot of people, especially, I think like Gen Xers and the boomer generation, right? Um we were all sort of taught and um educated to this idea that psychedelics are drugs and dangerous and illegal and unsafe, and so I think it's really, and also I think a lot of us have been taught like there's only one kind of way to engage with a psychedelic, which is, tripping, right? Like some big, I call it the cannonball and firework kind of experience. And in fact, that is one way, but it is not the only way. And we're seeing now different kinds of dosing um, having real effects that are not just requiring these very big experiences, which, I don't think are for everyone. And certainly not for everyone all the time, right? Like maybe it's once or a few times in a lifetime. And maybe there's some people who, need much more than that. But I think there are also people who never need to have that kind of experience, but may want to engage and experience like the wisdom of these plants, um, but without having this big many hour long kind of experience, maybe because they're sober, maybe because they're um sensitive, right? Maybe because they're medically complicated or on pharmaceuticals or have a mental health history. So macrodosing is that traditional way of dosing where it's a big experience. You're like going to be out of commission for many hours generally, and in those cases, you definitely need someone to be there, particularly if this is for a therapeutic reason. And that's what a lot of the studies have been looking at. Microdosing is what we would call a sub-psychedelic experience. Microdosing kind of got popularized by, like Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs and bros somehow, um, because it helped them feel more creative and more, kind of uplifted, and, but in fact, it is an indigenous way of engaging with these medicines, long standing. And they don't call it microdosing. But the idea of microdosing is you're kind of getting the unfolding of the experience, but you can drive, you can take care of your kids, you can go to work, you can go to the grocery store. This isn't like a put taking you out kind of experience. It's an unfolding, let's say, where what would normally be one big dose is divided over maybe a month or 3 months or something, and you're doing it every day or every few days oftentimes. Um, and people find that they feel a little euphoric, so it's very mood enhancing. They might feel it might help pain. We're seeing microdosing studies now looking at dementia, at Parkinson's, at ALS. Migraines, cluster headaches, and in fact, looking at things like osteoporosis, retinal degeneration, because what we know about a lot of these, the compounds in them, is that they actually are very powerful antioxidants that stimulate something called the sigma 1R receptor through DMT. And the sigma 1R receptor upregulates mitochondrial function. So, like, energy is better, cells function better, everything's kind of up leveled with these sort of DMT experiences. But we ourselves make DMT in our bodies, and a lot of plants make DMT. That doesn't necessarily alter you. So the microdosing is, I think, going to be very interesting. Very, I think, is going to be much more widespread, probably than macrodosing will ever be. And then there's quantum dosing, and quantum dosing is engaging in a more vibrational way. And this is looking really at the concepts of quantum physics and quantum biology, which are not just new age or marketing terms, they're scientific. And it's something I love teaching about, actually, is, understanding that um, vibration and frequency and the way we work with water, all of these things actually in our bodies influence the way our cells function. So, quantum dosing could be as simple as what I do, which is I grow these plants and I tend them. And so, my experience is that these plants are divas and they take a lot of effort to care for, and I learn a lot and experience a lot by being with these plants. But there are also things like you can wear them. There are also things like even hearing about them, right? There's a way in which like the medicine can kind of begin to do its work. And then there are things like quantum drops, which we talked about, which is a vibrational oral way of engaging with the plant that doesn't contain the actual plant itself. So it's legal, it's safe, but it is made in ceremony where there's a kind of quantum dose within the drops. And people are using these and experiencing really powerful results. So there's a lot of ways to engage with these master teachers that doesn't always involve, maybe what a lot of us would think.
It's just so very interesting. I know that I've gone to some of your ceremonies where minor things where you're just holding the plant and it raises the vibration and you feel so incredible. So these are things that everybody can do in some respect and use the plants. I love that vibration because really the whole world is vibration. I'm very big into that as well. And just that's so interesting just by being raising the plants and watering the plants and being around them, that you can raise your vibration as well and being that part of nature. You wanna just show do you have the drops with you? Because it's such an interesting concept about the drops.
Sure. Yeah, I have one of them here, and this is the grandfather, which is made with so I grow these plants, as I said, and this one is made with the San Pedro cactus. And when people actually buy them, they get a whole kind of how-to manual of like engagement and things like that. But basically, it's very, it's just like easy, you know, um, and you'll see I'm not, I might be a little happier, but I'm certainly not, it doesn't make you high or anything like that. But, we have the grandfather, the grandmother, and the children. And so made with San Pedro, ayahuasca, and the mushrooms. And we've seen such amazing outcomes with people. Right now, a lot of, and this wasn't because we tried to make this happen, but a lot of therapists and physicians started working with these with themselves and then sharing them with their clients and patients. And we get just emails almost every day from people all around the world who have been experiencing moving through trauma, right? One doctor wrote me and said he had gotten an emergency appendectomy and he'd been really struggling that week. He said, I started taking the quantum drops, and he said, I don't feel like I identify with that pain anymore. And I didn't feel so agitated and upset with the setbacks and the complications that came up. I felt this real shift where I was more impervious to the healing, the ups and downs of the healing process, right? So just such interesting kinds of feedback. And of course, this is both a very ancient technology, but also kind of a new and very modern technology. So it's been really amazing to see this kind of approach unfold. And it is like really what master plants do is, and I can kind of just explain this briefly is, they increase neuroplasticity, which is so good for the aging brain and everyone's brain, of course. Um, so, helping us to see what we maybe didn't see, helping our brains to kind of adapt and continue to be smart and sharp and have great memories. And then also, one of the things, right? A lot of us are living, and we don't even realize it's so invisible to us. A lot of the things that tend to make us feel unhappy come from experiences that we had probably like before we turned 10 years old, maybe even before we turned 7 years old, when a lot of our programming happened. It's normal, right, to get programming because you don't know anything when you come into the world, and your family teaches you what it means to be in your family and what's needed and how you're supposed to behave, and then in education and then in your community and so on. There's a lot of programming that happens, and most of it becomes unconscious once we kind of emerge from that early period. And many of us, for the entirety of our lives, are operating from this unconscious programming that in many cases is not quite right for us, right? Because that was from that time. And we're living in this whole different time, right? That emerges afterwards. And so, um, and a lot of that can be also things like big T or little t trauma, right? The big T trauma like abandonment or abuse or divorce or incarceration in the family or addiction, right? Things that I think most of us agree are big T traumas, and also are unfortunately quite common, right? That many people go through one or more of those things. And then little T trauma, like, bullying, or, having a parent that like was late to pick you up every day from school or whatever, but that like really we internalize in what's called cellular memory. So part of what these approaches, and why I love them, right, is like it's expanding the conversation around healing to take it just not just from physical or even just mental, but physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, where we're really starting to understand how these cellular memories that we're living from that might really be interrupting our ability to function at our best, even to be able to take care of ourselves, to exercise well, to take our supplements, to not feel blue, right? When the events of the world are happening, just all different kinds of things. Um, you know, this is a way to kind of help us emerge from that cellular memory and shift that through neuroplasticity, and making new connections in the brain that we didn't make before.
And do you find it's most effective working with someone else? Like, when you have people on these different the drops or whatever you're using, do you then talk through things? I mean, do you go through procedures or something to get them back to that, to so they're able to move beyond?
Absolutely. So part of, I do free monthly ceremonies and we do like some of them are inner child work, some of them are, reparenting, some of them are not necessarily always related to childhood, right? But these are ways to kind of engage with the quantum dosing. But for micro dosing, I absolutely love working with people one on one because of the way things do open and unfold. It's really helpful to have someone to talk to who kind of understands, because what a lot of these things kind of offer is this feeling of, I'm going to use this word and I do use it in my book, but like that we live in an enchanted world. And what I mean by enchanted is that we're surrounded by life and we're surrounded by beauty and we're surrounded by these beings, right? Plants and animals and sun and wind and water and all these kind of very miraculous things um, that we have been conditioned in our life to kind of make background scenery. And so we don't get the kind of sense of connection and support and community and delight, right? Living in an enchanted world is really about like feeling that sense of charm. And that's what makes life feel worth living, right? Especially when we do have a lot of complicated things going on, individually, collectively, and so on, to just have that to sustain us and to uplift us and to make us feel guided and supported is so important, to feel that sense of magic and enchantment in the world. It's not delusional. It's like, it's just an awareness. It's an awareness that actually our ancestors have had since the beginning of time. Like, it's very new that we don't live that way anymore.
No?
And
Yeah.
that's this deficit I think that we're all in. Like, something I found so interesting that I talk about in my book is people who are depressed have fewer connections between neurons. Their neurons become lonely. And when they engage with psychedelics, whether it's a large dose or a small dose, etc., they start making more connections. Like, their neurons literally become more connected, more social, more supported. This is even true on a mitochondrial level, that our mitochondria, when in sort of danger mode, which we can live in for years and years and years because of trauma, right, is in a meatball configuration where it's protecting itself, right? Not very good for growth, not very good for exchanging nutrients or getting rid of waste. When um, when the cell shifts out of that trauma state, right, shifts out of danger mode into kind of what we would call salugenesis, right, the being in the direction of health and healing, um, it becomes long branched spaghetti configuration. So these mitochondria, these energy makers of the cell, actually also become more communal, more connected, more social in a cell that feels well and at ease, right? And so these are the kinds of things that I think are so exciting, that we actually can see that sense of connection in our cells and our cell organelles, literally on a microscopic level, and then of course also on a communal level, like everywhere in between.
Wow, this is so exciting, and to me, it resonates so much because I believe we're meant here to thrive, not just survive, and too many people are just getting through the day, "How's your day?" "I made it through. It's fine," but that's not what we're here to do. So I love, love, love the word enchanted. And I know you had this program that I actually took. I think it was called Enchanted Life, all the things we can do to make our life so enchanted, because that's what it should be. The world around us is enchanted, and we can view the world almost through enchanted eyes because it's available to us. And so often we don't see it that way. We just see the problems, and we miss out on all this enchantment that so I so resonate with that. I really love it. But I have another question for you. So you're saying when someone, let's say they work with you or another practitioner or whatever they're doing, how often, because you said when you did the macro dosing, sometimes people only had to do it once and then they were able to move beyond and start healing and whatever. But what about this micro dosing? Is that something we do on a continuous basis? or it's something we do for a period of time and then we're able to move on? How does that work?
So it's something that can be done on a continuous basis. It's not something you would maybe just do one time, but it might, right? If we think about what a big dose might be, right? That would be like divided and taken over the course of a few months, right? So that idea is it could be for like a couple months, 2, 3 months. For some people, it can be longer. And the way people, so the dosing part could be for a period of time. It could be continual until they feel, like they're in a good space. Or it could be, do it and then maybe sometime later they'll come back to it and do it again as needed. Um, and in terms of like support during that time, sometimes people want to begin with support so that they're sort of having that, they understand kind of what their intention is in that process, right? Because they're like, maybe they're in pain, or maybe they're depressed, or maybe they're feeling like they're not as sharp mentally, or whatever it might be. Or it could just be something more spiritual, right? Feeling like, I don't feel like I belong, like I belong in the world that I'm in. And that is a real thing. People don't have anyone to talk to other than sometimes like religious leaders about sort of the spiritual angst that comes up in life. So any of those reasons could be a reason. And yeah, it can be for a chunk of time and then that's it, or any variation.
Can it be long term? Like someone who takes a supplement long term, can they take this long term?
They could. And for quantum dosing, it's, I think, most effective doing it daily. So what we've seen is that creates like the greatest sort of shift and upliftment has been daily. But it doesn't have to be, right? So this is sort of the idea is like also like learning what is working the best for you in the process. And yes, people can do microdosing over the course of years and years. And, you know, it's it's very, very safe. And there's not a lot of things out there. And I don't know your position on things like calcium, for example, but even like vitamin D and calcium have controversy around them. Um, you know, in a sense, right? Where it's like you have to know what form to take and like when to take it and what to take it with and all of those things to get the best benefit and maybe not to like mess yourself up in some way or another. Or let's say magnesium, right? All like really important for bones and really, really important to have in our lives. Um, you know, this is something that's actually, although it's been branded as being, dangerous or things like that, like microdosing and quantum dosing have very little downside. What I will say, and I do want to be explicit about this, is some parts of the country and the world um, have decriminalized or legalized, let's say mushrooms, right? And some places are in the process of that, and some places it's still illegal. So I do want to be explicit that it depends on where you are in terms of legality. Quantum dosing is legal anywhere and, for anyone. So that's an kind of, I guess, a plus for quantum dosing. But microdosing, I think, and macrodosing ultimately are going to be more and more and more and more available. And right now, the state of Oregon, the state of California has just legalized or just voted to legalize. Many cities, Denver, Washington, D.C., Ann Arbor, Michigan, on and on and on. There's many places that it is totally decriminalized.
So if someone's listening and they're like, "Oh, yeah, I've been on antidepressants," or to me, I'm thinking this is something if before you go on antidepressants, this is something that really could benefit. That's so often antidepressants are thrown at people. "Oh, you're in a bad situation." Antidepressants where am I right? This could be certainly an alternative. Um,
Well, yes. And I could tell you even that what we know is that, and this is just science from this year, is that so we know serotonin receptor. Everyone I think has heard of serotonin as like kind of the happiness molecule, et cetera. It's more than that, of course, but usually the receptors for serotonin are on the outside of the cell, right? They're on what we call the cell membrane, and then serotonin comes and binds and then activates certain things inside the cell. What we learned this year, because we know that psychedelics work through the serotonin receptors, a certain kind in particular. And but nobody could understand, like, well, psychedelics obviously don't do the same thing serotonin does, right? Their action is somewhat different. It turns out there are serotonin receptors inside the cell. So there are these like intracellular serotonin receptors that serotonin molecules actually don't stimulate at all because they don't cross into the cell. And SSRIs also don't cross into the cell. But psychedelics, large dose, small dose, um, activate those intracellular serotonin receptors. And so they actually activate some of the very same actions plus more. And so we know and are seeing actually now in studies, many studies, and I think we're going to see more and more about microdosing. It's just a little harder to study microdosing. That they are going to be, I think, serious competition for SSRIs because their side effect profile is zero, practically zero. You know, I mean, obviously, you have to know where it comes from, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas SSRIs do have a lot of side effects, and they're very, very effective for depression.
Yeah, that's
Profound.
so great, and SSRIs affect bones. So, one of the side effects is reduced bone
Yes.
density, so a lot of people don't realize that, and they're not told that when they're put on the SSRIs. They're told other things, but they're not told that this can negatively affect your bone health, and people don't realize that until years later, and they're like but, yeah, that's so
Yeah.
interesting. So, someone listening, I guess well, tell us about your book because I know you're giving everybody the first 3 chapters. They can so that will really give them a taste of what it's about in the introduction. I think and it's a fascinating book. I mean, you really go into things in way more detail. Um, so that's
Yeah.
the yeah, and so that will have the link for. And do you wanna just tell everybody the link too in case they don't go to the show notes? They just go to
Um, Gosh.
oh, that's okay. It will be in the show notes, the link to the
It's
first 3
like
cha
maybe
yeah.
like Dr. Maya. I mean, you can find everything that I have at drmaya.com, drmaya.com. It's like super simple. You can find the free chapters there. You can find everything, but I know that Margie is going to give you
A
the
link.
link. So I recommend going to the show notes and clicking on her links because that way, you're not going to have to like go searching. It'll be right there for you.
Okay, great. And then the other thing, so just when people are listening and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, this sounds amazing." Where so they could start with your book, but do you have, you know, do you work with just people that you see physically? How does that work? If someone like, "Oh gosh, I love this. How could I work with you?"
Yeah, no, I do work with like a small sort of I have a small part of my time that I love working with people one on one and I haven't wanted to give that up. So I do work with people through microdosing or quantum dosing. Um, and we call them physical, mental, emotional, spiritual consults, right? So it's like they can be coached with one session or a package, and the best way to find that is actually to come to my website at drmaya.com. And it's something I'm very passionate about.
Is
I
that
think
virtually? Is that so that's virtually they
oh
can do that?
yes, and it's only virtual right
Okay.
now. So yeah, I think like we've sort of tried to whitewash the human experience. And so I love I don't know, I like to hold space for people as they kind of grapple and find their way through like times of transition, for example, or just things that they're, exploring.
And people who are listening, how are there practitioners, not that we wanna that they should avoid, or if they wanted to find a practitioner who is qualified to do this, is there any type of things they should look for or certifications or it's not that advanced yet?
Well, so we're offering a professional certification um, starting in 2024, but applications are going to be opening, and we are keeping it pretty small and intimate, where we're really going to go through having psychedelic informed practitioners who can offer maybe also the bigger experiences as that rolls out more and becomes more available in more places in the country and in the world. But just being informed, right, is like so important. And there are practitioners, and when people need that from their wherever they are locally, you can always just message me, um, and I can, help people. It's really important to have a very good, reputable person because it is a vulnerable position to be in. Um, if someone is like having a journey, if that's what they want, right? To have that big dose. And you must have someone at a minimum who has like professionalism, right? Where you know that they're going to be um, like upstanding and take good care of you and really have, their T's crossed, I's dotted, and so on.
And in terms of some of the clinics, are those okay? The clinics
So the
that they
big thing that
yeah.
people can do right now in the US, across the country is ketamine. Ketamine is not a plant. And it's not exactly a psychedelic, but um, it is being offered in different places. And there are some good places out there. Again, people can feel free to reach out, connect with me. I'm happy to if they have something or someone that they're curious about and I know I'm happy to give them, feedback, but ketamine clinics are out there and some people are finding them to be very helpful and they're legal.
Oh, this has been so wonderful and just so interesting because that's what I like to do. I like to inform people so that, if you're out there and you are struggling, this is something just a lot of us don't know about, or it just seems so woo woo. And to have you as a physician who's really studied this and seen the benefits, it really just brings it home that it is a treatment that can really be life changing for many people. So, is there any last minute things you want to say? We'll have all the information in the show notes, but anything last minute you wanna leave us with besides an enchanted life? I love that. It's my
Well,
favorite.
very much the enchanted life for sure. Yeah, and I think the one thing I just want to close with is, and I think I said this, but just it's really about coming with care and consideration, right? Like that is, I think, the difference between having a good experience, whether it's macro, micro, quantum, coming with the right research, with the right approach, with the right support versus, how things happened in the past, right? And I think a lot of people have been very colored by that. And that I think makes all the difference. So, yeah. And I just want to thank you so much, Margie, for sharing this with people because it is a new topic and it's very, mind opening and turning some ideas upside down. And so thank you for opening this up and letting me talk about this.
Oh, my pleasure. I always love being with you, and I'm gonna feel enchanted the rest of the day. Anyway, thanks so much, Dr. Maya, and I look forward to staying in touch. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Maya and now have a better understanding of master plans, psychedelics. How can these be used to enhance your life? All the links that Dr. Maya talked about, including the free 3 chapters to her book, will be in the show notes. And make sure to download my Improve Your Bone Health Naturally mini course, which is also free and in the downloads. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.